Hello, everyone. Welcome to the December session of the Health Law and Ethics Network Lunchtime Seminar. We'd like to start the Helen seminars by acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands of the University of Melbourne, that is the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and we'd like to pay our respects to their elders past, present, and emerging. So today we have Professor Savulescu speaking for us. He's a bit of a repeat presenter at Helen. Professor Savulescu is the Chen Su Lan Professor in Medical Ethics at the National University of Singapore, where he directs the Centre for Biomedical Ethics. He's an award-winning ethicist and moral philosopher trained in neuroscience, medicine, and philosophy, and going on to hold the Uhiro Chair in Practical Ethics at the University of Oxford, where he founded the Oxford Uhiro Centre for Practical Ethics in 2003, and he has recently moved to the National University of Singapore. And he is also a distinguishing visiting professorial fellow at the Murdoch Children's Research Institute and Melbourne Law School. So he's a very, very busy professor, and we're very lucky to have him to speak to us today about when should moral bioenhancement be mandatory, the vaccine analogy. So Julian, I'll invite you to start to share your screen and take it away.
Okay, thanks very much, Chris. So I'm going to talk about the concept of mandatory moral bioenhancement. And the structure of the paper is quite simple. It will have 4 sections, and I'm going to mainly read it, and I look forward to your feedback. So this is a sort of paper in draft. So the introduction. In an era confronted by profound existential threats such as powerful technological misuse, global collective action problems, and anthropogenic climate change, we find ourselves faced with an urgent question. How can we promote morally right behaviour in individuals to address these challenges? One proposed answer is moral bioenhancement, a biomedical intervention aimed at increasing the likelihood of moral behaviour. However, its effectiveness can be limited unless implemented on a mandatory basis, igniting a debate about the balance between individual autonomy and societal good. Moral bioenhancement represents a potent fusion of biology and ethics, harnessing the powerful biomedical technologies such as pharmacological, genetic, or other biological interventions to foster morally upright behaviour. However, voluntary implementation has often proved insufficient in realising the desired improvements in moral conduct. On the other hand, opponents of mandatory moral bioenhancement argue that coercion infringes upon individual freedom and autonomy. They argue that moral bioenhancement, to be truly effective, must be a product of free choice. Otherwise, the very essence of enhancement is undermined. Yet we contend that under certain conditions, coercion can be justifiably used to promote societal well-being. Drawing on the principles of public health ethics, we propose a potential model for the mandatory implementation of moral bioenhancement. Following Aristotle's vision of the state as the nourisher of virtue in its citizens, we explore the role of coercive measures in fostering moral behaviour. We advocate that mandatory moral bioenhancement should be employed only under specific circumstances, specifically under 4 conditions. Firstly, there's an especially grave threat. Secondly, it's safe and effective. Thirdly, its anticipated benefits significantly outweigh the costs, and its comparative expected utility surpasses less coercive options, including incentives. And fourthly, the costs of mandates are proportionate to the gains in expected utility. So section 1, the problem of moral bioenhancement. This section explores the multifaceted concept of moral bioenhancement, discussing its significance and potential implementation strategies, along with major objections to it. Moral enhancement denotes any intervention aimed at increasing the likelihood of morally right actions. It encompasses a variety of strategies such as enhancing altruism, empathy, adherence to moral codes, impulse control, delay of gratification, sense of justice, and mindfulness of moral facts. This broad spectrum of moral enhancements reflects the diverse moral theories at play, with utilitarianism and contractualist theory being the most commonly employed. It's important to distinguish moral bioenhancement, which involves biological methods of promoting moral behaviour, from concepts like moral correction, moral education, and indoctrination. morality correction involves aligning actions with specific moral theories, a practice that borders on indoctrination. In contrast, moral bioenhancement does not merely focus on exposure to morality, but rather on the cognitive and emotional changes that increase the likelihood of actions aligning with moral theory. It also differs from moral education, which is instructional, and indoctrination, which discourages exposure to alternative theories. Moral bioenhancement is a term used when interventions involve biological changes to increase the probability of moral behaviour. And it can be implemented prophylactically or therapeutically. Prophylactic moral enhancement is implemented before an act aiming to promote an individual or collective action that can be utilised at a societal level or within specific institutions. A binding Ulysses-style contract in the context of moral bioenhancement refers to a firm voluntary commitment made by individuals to improve their moral behaviour. This term, inspired by Ulysses' mythological tale, signifies a decision that is not easily reversible, but aiming at restricting liberty in the short term to realise some long-term goal, emphasising the proactive and voluntary nature of the moral choice. On the other hand, therapeutic moral enhancement is implemented after an act, serving as a remedial measure to rectify or mitigate the consequences of immoral behaviour. Despite its potential benefits, moral bioenhancement has encountered several objections. The first objection is the claim that changing human nature is tantamount to playing God. However, many humans have been modifying their nature for centuries through means such as diet, culture, tool use, and domestication. Today, we possess more direct methods of change, like genetic engineering and biomedical interventions. The second objection posits that moral bioenhancement is too risky or too costly. However, it's important to note that the science of moral bioenhancement is still in its infancy, and while there are costs associated with enhancements, these costs are not inherently prohibitive. In fact, the potential benefits of moral bioenhancement could far outweigh the initial investment. For instance, the development of interventions that increase the probability of moral behaviour could have far-reaching implications for society, potentially when given to children, and potentially in reducing the instances of harm and promoting collective action. Moreover, the risks associated with moral bioenhancement are not necessarily greater than those associated with other interventions. It's crucial to consider that most neurotransmitters, which are often targeted in bioenhancement, serve multiple functions and are found in many different brain regions. Therefore, while there may be many potential side effects, these are not unique to moral bioenhancement, are a common consideration in the development of any psychiatric intervention. A third and often cited objection to moral bioenhancement is the concern that it could undermine individual autonomy if implemented coercively. This objection is rooted in the belief that moral bioenhancement would only be effective if it were mandatory, therefore potentially forcing individuals to act against their own goals and values. However, this paper will argue that this objection needs to be considered in the broader context of the public interest. Drawing on parallels with public health policies such as mandatory vaccination, we can see that there are instances where individual autonomy may be overridden for the greater good of society. While the notion of coercion in moral bioenhancement is indeed a complex issue, it's crucial to balance the benefits of widespread moral enhancement with the need to respect individual autonomy. So, Section 2, the public health ethics and coercion. This section sheds light on the circumstances under which coercion may be justified to promote public health, as opposed to moral outcomes. Specifically, we scrutinise the validity of mandatory vaccination, an issue closely linked to the domain of public health ethics. We propose that the principles can be extrapolated to the realm of other public goods, such as climate change mitigation and existential risk reduction through moral bioenhancement. Mandatory vaccination represents one of the most debated public health policies. Employed previously against diseases like smallpox and polio, and currently for some childhood vaccines, mandatory vaccination continues to evoke controversy. An illustrative case is the influenza vaccine controversy in Denmark, highlighting the tension between enhancing public health and preserving individual freedom. The vaccination program did not achieve the desired uptake despite financial penalties for non-compliance, raising questions about the role of coercion in vaccination programs. Resistance to mandatory vaccination often stems from concerns around individual freedom, safety, perceived risk, and sometimes religious beliefs. In response, coercion may be justified to attain public health benefits such as herd immunity. However, the implementation of coercion must be bound by certain principles. WHO provides a comprehensive set of guidelines on the permissible restriction of rights to public health. These guidelines were initially developed in response to the challenges of multiply resistant TB control, but have broader applicability to any public health intervention that might infringe on individual rights. According to these guidelines, any restrictions of rights must meet several criteria. First, the restriction must be provided for and carried out in accordance with the law. Secondly, it must serve a legitimate public objective of general interest. Third, the restriction must be strictly necessary in a democratic society to achieve the objective. Fourth, there should be no less intrusive or restrictive means to achieve the same objective. And finally, the restriction must be based on science. We suggest rather that 4 ethical principles for the implementation of coercion in the public health interest based on these guidelines. So, firstly, coercion is only justified when there is a significant improvement in the outcome. And this requires that the problem be significant and that vaccination makes significant progress to resolving this problem. In vaccination programs, coercion is legitimate if it significantly boosts vaccination rates of a safe and effective vaccine, which is observed in smallpox and polio. Secondly, coercion must be proportionate to the benefits accrued. For vaccination, this signifies that the cost of coercion does not surpass the benefits. This principle of proportionality also holds weight in the sphere of moral enhancement. The third principle asserts that coercion should facilitate an easy rescue for the individual, implying that the coercion must be safe and effective. This is pertinent for vaccinations and moral enhancement alike. The last principle determines that coercion should be proportionate to the severity of the problem and must be the most effective strategy. This was evident in the case of smallpox, where mandatory vaccination was an appropriate response to the disease's lethal and contagious nature. Collectively, these principles present a heuristic for evaluating when coercion is justified to promote a public good like vaccination. This algorithm should be treated as a guideline rather than a definitive rule for when coercion is justified. Other principles may be introduced, but we judge that these are the most crucial. Public health ethics is fundamentally about promoting the greater good, which can be achieved by resource allocation or by constraining individual freedom and behaviour. We suggest that moral bioenhancement, like vaccination, can be utilised to promote public goods, and the principles established in public health ethics can be used to assess the case for moral enhancement. So, third section, applying public health ethics to moral enhancement. First of all, the existence of a grave problem. The foremost condition for applying coercion is the existence of a serious problem that needs urgent attention. As the smallpox and polio vaccination campaigns have shown, mandatory measures can effectively address widespread health crises. Similarly, if there's a problem that threatens a wider community, such as a rise in high crime rates, the case for mandatory bioenhancement becomes stronger. However, where the problem is primarily personal, like drug addiction, the argument for mandatory moral bioenhancement is weaker. Given the existential threats that exist through progressive climate change and also the misuse of biological knowledge to create biological weapons, or misuse of nuclear technology or artificial intelligence, there arguably exists an existential threat to humanity this century, which arguably represents a much greater threat than historical public health crises. Secondly, the bioenhancement is safe and effective. Throughout history, bioenhancements like glasses have been used to rectify human conditions. Today, there is a range of interventions available to improve moral behaviour, such as pharmaceuticals, genetic manipulation, brain stimulation, and technology. Their effectiveness is a matter of degree and may depend on the problem they aim to solve. For example, pharmaceuticals aimed at increasing empathy or impulse control may be more effective in reducing crime than educational campaigns. One study of the use of Ritalin for convicted criminals with attention deficit disorder reduced violent reoffence in Swedish prisons by 30%, which is much greater than most rehabilitative campaigns. Thirdly, there must be greater comparative net utility than other forms of intervention, including incentives. The utility of a policy is defined by its total expected benefits, subtracting its expected harms. For instance, if two policies for combating serious crime are considered, one involving mandatory moral bioenhancement and the other program involving incentives and rehabilitation, the one with the greater expected utility should be adopted. This requires that we compare the expected utility of less coercive options. But the idea that we should adopt the least restrictive option is very constraining. Often more coercion results in greater benefits. So the more severe the punishment of the crime, the less people are inclined to commit the crime. So we have to judge the proportionality of the increases of coercion with the increases in benefits. Lastly, the costs of coercion should be proportionate to the benefits. The costs of implementing a bioenhancement policy must be proportionate to its benefits. For example, if mandatory moral bioenhancement could reduce crime by 30%, but cause significant psychiatric harm in 10% of cases, this would have to be factored in to evaluating it. In the case of Ritalin and impulsive violence, there are actually benefits both to the individual's own well-being and autonomy in being able to restrict impulses and defer gratification for greater long-term benefits. In the case of the COVID-19 pandemic, some countries employed mandatory vaccination policies. For example, Italy and Greece imposed fines of around €500 for individuals over the age of 60 or 65 if they failed to be vaccinated. This is a relatively minor cost and arguably proportionate to the threat on health resources posed by those individuals becoming sick. Section 4, the coercion is not truly morally enhancing. So this objection argues that moral bioenhancement, to be truly moral, must occur voluntarily. Proponents of this view claim that moral bioenhancement, defined as the use of biomedical interventions to increase the likelihood of moral behaviour, should be a matter of personal choice. They argue that even if moral bioenhancement is employed for the right reasons, it's not genuinely moral if it happens as a result of coercion. So, response 1, coercive interventions can still be moral. Moral bioenhancement can indeed be moral, even if it has not been autonomously chosen, provided it's applied for the right reasons. There are numerous instances of morally enhancing interventions which have been implemented as a result of coercion. One pertinent example is mandatory vaccination. The mandatory nature of vaccination does not negate its rightness. It protects both the individual and the community from harm, perhaps the vaccinated from being burdens on society and averts loss of life. Similarly, imprisonment serves as a deterrent to committing crimes, which is morally a right reason to imprison someone. The threat of imprisonment deters people from causing harm, and despite being a coercive measure, it's still morally right. Thirdly, education in most parts of the world is mandatory, and it's a form of moral enhancement. It's not a moral bioenhancement, but it's a mandatory moral enhancement. It's nonetheless right. Therefore, the mere fact of coercion does not render an intervention wrong. Coercion is only immoral when employed for the wrong reasons. Many actions which are not autonomously chosen can still be morally good actions. What matters is whether the loss of liberty is justified by the gain in utility. Response 2, mandatory policies.
Sorry, Julian, just cut in. I'm getting some questions about your slides. People wanting to see them. Do you want to drive them forward, or do you want us to assure everyone that?
That's the last slide there. So I don't have any other slides.
So maybe is it not? Have you been driving them? So maybe there's been an IT problem because we can just see your title slide.
Oh, sorry. I've been moving them, but backwards.
No, sorry, that was my fault.
You can't see them.
Do you want to stop sharing and start again?
Sorry. Well, I'm nearly finished, so it's probably
okay.
not going to make a difference now. But so the old technology. Okay, so I'm nearly finished. So we can have questions. So the second response is that mandatory policies do not undermine altruism and genuinely moral choice. Critics often argue that mandatory policies such as moral bioenhancement impede genuine moral behaviour by coercing individuals into ethical conduct, eliminating the essence of altruism and genuine moral choice. This perspective contends that genuine morality hinges on autonomy and free will. An individual coerced into donate or giving money to charity, for instance, would not be demonstrating true generosity. Despite these arguments, the assertion that mandatory policies necessarily undermine moral choices is not accurate. In fact, a close examination of everyday scenarios indicates that even within a framework of imposed rules, moral choices are not merely possible, but are often made. For instance, consider driving regulations such as speed limits. Two drivers might adhere to the speed limit, yet their motivations may diverge significantly. One driver may adhere to the limit out of fear of financial penalties, thereby acting primarily out of self-interest. This is not a moral action. In contrast, another driver may choose to drive within the speed limit out of desire not to endanger others, demonstrating true moral choice. In this scenario, the mandatory policy, the speed limit, does not preclude the exercise of moral judgment. Instead, it establishes a context within which individuals can still make moral decisions. Thus, a person can genuinely act morally even in the presence of mandates if they choose to act for morally sound reasons. Furthermore, mandatory policies can incentivize moral behaviour amongst those not initially inclined to it by aligning self-interest with morality through imposed costs for undesired behaviours. These policies potentially nudge individuals towards decisions that promote the greater good, even if they initially prioritise their own interests. As Aristotle argues, virtue is the creature of habit. Performing the right actions, even for the wrong reasons, may over time cultivate virtue. Thus, mandatory policies, while restricting certain freedoms, do not necessarily undermine altruism or genuinely moral choice. Indeed, they create a societal framework that encourages moral behaviour and allows for genuine moral decision-making. So, conclusion. This paper has embarked on an exploration of the complex landscape of mandatory moral bioenhancement. The crux of our argument establishes that certain situations justify the employment of moral bioenhancement. 4 conditions must be met. First of all, there must be a grave problem facing society. Secondly, moral bioenhancement should be safe and effective. Thirdly, a policy of coercive moral bioenhancement must be significantly better than any less coercive alternative, including incentives. And lastly, the costs of the mandate must be proportionate to the expected utility of the intervention. In another paper, we argued that vaccination is analogous to wearing seatbelts. Indeed, it might be said that mandatory moral bioenhancement is the seatbelt of collective action. So that's the draft paper. I'm sorry that the sort of 2 slides that I had are not showing up.
All right. Well, that's a great way to end. Everyone, let's thank Julian for a very interesting, thought-provoking seminar. Before we go, I'll remind you, Sarah's put a link for the Hello mailing list if you're not already on that. We have a couple of more Helen events for December. On Thursday, there is the book launch of The Future of Mental Health, Disability and Criminal Law in honor of Bernadette McSherry. So please look out for that and register if you're interested. And next Monday, we have our Helix and Helen joint seminar with Professor Ted Dove on the nature of our privacy. So great. I hope to see you guys at those events. And thank you again, Julian.
Thanks for your feedback and your votes. Sorry about the slides.
See you then.